Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who gave up on crosses around their neck or garlic on their doorframe and just said, I'll get a dog. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a different genre, idea, or topic. And right now we are doing Occult Detective October. So we're going to read all the stories in Algernon Blackwood's The Complete John Silence, including this one, a psychical invasion. That's a hard word to say. I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested just in the idea of the occult detective. My favorite comic book character was always Doctor Strange. So reading and discovering John Silence for the first time, it just tickled me, tickled my soul.
And I'm Bob, and this is Dwy. I had to call her Lao Da, but this book is great, Zach. It's got dogs and cats. So I brought Dwy because she looks like Flame the dog. Hi, Dwy.
Hey, Dwy.
Okay, she wants a snack. I'm going to let her go.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right, Bob, what do we know about Algernon Blackwood?
This is our second one by Algernon Blackwood. I'm really excited to do the Occult Detective month, but we read The Willows before, which was very scary. That was a story about two guys going into the wilderness and finding, oh no, where we've gone is Cosmic Horror Town. But I think Algernon Blackwood is really interesting because he was an outdoorsman. He was traveling a lot. Apparently, many of his stories were based on real stories that happened to him or his friends, so he's incorporating things from his life. But I think what we liked most about him was his involvement in different, like he was involved in Theosophy, Order of the Golden Dawn, and he was interested in these ideas of occult, of magic, and how they can influence us to think differently. And I think when he was writing, he would often say, he's trying to get us to have this incredible experience of something awesome or something sublime, something terrifying and yet something miraculous. And through doing that, it would open up our consciousness. He was trying to give us a brand new experience, Zach.
Yeah. I like what you said about thinking differently, because the quote here from John Silence is, learn how to think and you've learned how to tap power at its source. And there's something like so intriguing about a psychic doctor. Now, at first I thought that meant he was clairvoyant, and he does seem to be clairvoyant, but actually I think that there's kind of a double entendre going on here, because he's not just like able to read people's minds as he demonstrates at the start of this, but he seems to be a doctor of the psychic. You know, like the first case of this occult detective is a man who's lost his sense of humor, a humorist who can no longer laugh and be funny anymore. All of his jokes just come out a little bitter, a little disturbing. And I don't know why, there's something so charming about that. Like in a world where other detectives, Sherlock Holmes, Poirot, they're out there solving murders. They're solving people who have been wronged in deed and action. And here there seems to be this focus on almost like a proto psychoanalyst, you know, like, you're not acting right. There's something in your soul, in your mind that doesn't seem to be working. And it's my job to to dig out, to uproot that corrupting influence and bring it to the light.
I'd say you're totally right, because when it's in three halves. Oh my God. It's in three parts. And the first two are the longest ones, and the third one's just a conclusion. Sorry. Third one's just a conclusion. But the first one is almost like, the psychoanalyst and the analysand on the couch, because this humorist is just telling him all of these things that have been happening to him. Then when John Silence actually goes and investigates this house, because he figures, okay, there must be a spirit in the house. I'll go there. But he just tells the guy, nope, you go elsewhere, and then it becomes his own investigation. It feels very much like he needs to figure out what psychological problem is now rooted in this guy because of this ghost or because of this haunting. And it's no longer so much about like trying to get ghosts out. It's just trying to solve this one guy's new psychological yet supernatural problem.
Yeah. And we really have to talk about the catalyst for this whole thing. Man smokes weed one time and basically opens his third eye. His senses become more attuned to what they call an increased scale of vibrations. So there's an awakening of inner senses, and he attains partial clairvoyance from a pure form of cannabis indica. Incredible. That's such a funny premise.
Yeah, poor guy, gateway drug, and it opens a gateway to hell. I thought this part was great. But I think it's interesting too. It reminds me again of the Willows, where you have this other dimension, imposing itself on you. But he gives us kind of more of a framework in this story where he says, okay, different things can cause it. He says violent emotions, certain moods of the soul, certain spiritual fevers, and they open the inner being, he says, to a cognizance of this astral region. And he says, but in your case, it was the power of a powerful drug.
I think for me, I'm really interested in learning more about like Blackwood's entire, I don't know what you call this, cosmology, his view of the spiritual realm, whether we can view this world that this ghost lives in, or this ghost comes from, or I guess rather it's like multiple ghosts, really, whether that world is the same world from which the Willows come from. You know what I mean? And I think that Blackwood is one of the few authors who I would really ask this question of, because he was so involved in with people like Golden Dawn or Theosophy. And I mean, I don't know a lot about Golden Dawn right now. I did just get a biography of Aleister Crowley, and I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about their beliefs. I know there's a lot of Kabbalah in there. There's a lot of astrology, numerology, tarot, stuff like that. But on the surface of it, I'm not exactly sure how to apply that framework to what we have read in the 2 Algernon Blackwood stories we've read so far, and what we will continue to read over the next 5 stories in this collection.
I'm thinking the same thing, Zach. I'm really interested in this. As far as I know,
Synchronicity.
He was doing synchronicity, not just a Police album or 2. Sorry, that was stupid. This I think is really interesting because he was part of the Golden Dawn, but he's in the First Order of the Golden Dawn, which we've talked about before, where they focused on theurgy and like good magic. And he actually talks about good magic and hints at evil magic in this story, because he says, if you knew anything of magic, when he's talking to the humorist later, he says, if you knew anything of magic, you would know that thought is dynamic, and that it may call into existence forms and pictures that may well exist for hundreds of years. So he's saying, okay, this person was doing evil magic many years ago, and now it still persists. These thoughts that she was putting out into the world, they still exist, and they're producing their own magic. It's like they can reproduce on their own now. But then he also says, and I think this is where maybe it's similar to the Willows, or it's completely 180 and about, a complete turnaround, because this is a cozy mystery. This is not horror. This is cozy horror mystery. But the difference, and maybe the similarity, is he becomes a filter for evil. So he gets the humorist out of there, and the humorist just not being there anymore is not plagued by these ghosts. He's pretty much fine. But Dr. John Silence wants to go and find something, learn something from this house. He goes, he brings the dog and the cat with him. Then as evil shoots all through the house, he stands there and he says, I know that I have experienced so many things, and I've become a selfless person, and because of this, I am like a air filter for evil ghosts. And it feels similar in a way to the Willows, where they say, okay, don't think about this other being from this other dimension. If you do, it will drive you crazy. Don't think too much. Just keep a level head. Think of something calm. John Silence does the similar thing, but it feels very different there in the Willows, where no matter what you do, it's going to kill you. And then here, maybe he's just more educated in the occult, but it feels maybe different, where you can use good magic to keep the bad magic at bay, and you can actually become a filter to purify bad magic.
Yeah, there's a couple things going on that I think really hints at what kind of vision of the occult world that he's giving, because he says that this presence in the house, this ancient witch spirit thing, is using low magic, is what he called. And I take low magic to be basically the equivalent of like witchcraft, boiling cauldron type stuff. You know what I mean? Which it would be compared to, the higher, I guess we could say, magic that he's up to, which is, a lot of what he refers to as a spiritual alchemy. He's he's absorbing all of the evil forces within himself and then transforming them into good purposes. Because at the end of the day, force, is what he says. So he's taking their force and he's rechanneling it back out at them to drive thee away, to get thee back, ghost. But I can't help but feel like there are certain words here that I don't know, like that are evocative of maybe his personal beliefs, or like spiritual alchemy, for example. Our occultist in the back of both of our pockets, Carl Jung, he talks a lot about alchemy. He's probably using it in a different word, but if you said the word spiritual alchemy to him, he would be like, oh yeah, that's the only kind of alchemy there is, the spiritual. It's all about transforming the inner self into something which is fundamentally better. I think that Blackwood is using it in a slightly different nuance of term, but it seems to be embedded within the larger occultist discourse that's happening in the early 20th century.
When the person who's doing this lower magic, trying to manifest something, he says that there's another region where float the waste and drift of all the centuries, the limbo of the shells of the dead, a densely populated region crammed with horror and abomination of all descriptions. And it reminds me kind of that Jungian idea of, the collective unconscious, where when you're having a breakthrough and the unconscious is speaking through you through dreams, making you do certain things, when you're having a kind of breakthrough, often there will be the like infantile desires, these things that kind of look disgusting to you. They don't sit right with you, and they feel maybe evil when you're first exposed to them. It reminds me of what's going on here, where there's a magical breakthrough, and now there's the residue of this magical breakthrough in the form of thousands of green-eyed glowing cats in this house. But when he purifies it, as you said, he turns it into good intentions. It feels kind of like that process of sublimating, I guess I wouldn't use sublimate, using that alchemical process of taking what is that? I can't remember what that.
It would probably be the shadow self, right? The shadow, or like the complexes, that are. Oh yeah,
the alchemical term that I can't. The sublimatio, I think. So not sublimation, like Freud would use it, but sublimatio, the idea of alchemy of alchemy, taking that base stuff, taking the shadow self stuff, I guess, processing it, and then, as he says, he says, since my motive was pure and my soul fearless, they could not work harm on me. And then, as he says, he absorbs these evil radiations and turns it into his own good purposes. So maybe it's a similar thing.
I think we need to pull a John Silence, take 5 years, drop out of society, and yet still make this YouTube channel, turn it into a occult studies YouTube channel, Wheel of Cosmic Suffering, and then come back and hit all of these weird authors, all of these occult authors with true expertise, and be like, this is exactly what they're doing here.
Yeah, instead of a lot of guessing. I'm sorry, everyone. That was a lot.
Hey, I'm in the same boat, Bob. I'm in the same. Hey, we're trying to figure this out in real time.
If anyone actually is a true expert out there, please let us know, because we're just curious about it. I'm curious too, when we talked about any detective, when they're starting off any detective writer, when they're creating a new detective, they have to kind of put down old detectives, But like Holmes does that, like, how dare you compare me to Dupin? And then Dupin does that too. How dare you compare me to Lecoq? But in this, he doesn't put down any particular detectives. However, he does anytime someone says, oh, you're clairvoyant. He says, clairvoyance, that's all a ruse. Or do you use divination? No, divination, it's silly. He doesn't say that, but he's very polite, of course. He's such a nice guy, John Silence. But instead of putting down detectives, he is disinterested in these other systems. He says there is something to them, but they're not exactly what people make them out to be. He says divination, all systems of divination, are merely so many methods of obscuring the outer vision in order that the inner vision may become open. Kind of like smoking the weed for the humorist. But then he also says for clairvoyance, he says, the true clairvoyant deplores his power because it just bothers the hell out of him. It adds a new horror to life, he says. But for him, and he never explains exactly what he's doing because he was gone for 5 years and no one knows what he did. But I think it is interesting to have an interest in the occult, to establish an occult detective, but then to never really tell us what occult thing he is doing. It keeps it very veiled in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, because, I mean, the Doctor Strange model would be, I mean, it's so, I just have to say, Doctor Strange is so obviously lifted from this trope that it just like, it pains me. It pains me. But like the Doctor Strange model is like, there is a spiritual entity which is causing trouble in comic book land in New York City, 1968. So what he will do is he doesn't fight it like with a gun or punches or anything. He sits down and he meditates and he battles it on the spiritual plane. You know what I mean? What I thought was so interesting about this was that the model was very much the same. You have a monster that exists in a higher dimension or the spiritual plane or, however you want to frame what's going on here. But he doesn't even battle it. You know what I mean? He gets a cat and a dog to do all the work for him. I thought I've never seen a either detective novel or an action adventure novel, even a psychedelic novel that did anything like this. This was such a creative way to solve the case.
I was really impressed. Like, it doesn't sound that good when you describe it. Like, he gets a dog and if I tell someone it's a book about a guy making a dog and a cat hunt down a ghost, but it's suspenseful, it's cute.
Scooby-Doo?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Okay, we're back into Scooby-Doo territory. Jinkies. I think it's very interesting the way that he was able to do that, and also, have this interesting, somewhat philosophical or at least esoteric studies, inside of this. But it was also so cute. The cat's name is Smoke. The dog's name is Flame. The dog is getting really old, and they're best buddies, and they play together in the house while John Silence just sits in the armchair. And I thought that was really great, and again, similar to the Willows, because he tells us, okay, if you try and force the whatever the spirit is or the ghost, if you try and force it to come out, or if you try and force this whole process, it just won't happen. You have to sit back, relax, and let the dog and the cat do the work, because they are more in tune with the spirit world.
So I'm really curious if there's some kind of connection there between the animals and the divination. I mean, so that idea that you quoted earlier, that in order to do divination, you obscure the outer vision so that your inner vision can become open. Okay, so there's this kind of innate ability within, presumably, each of us to access this kind of inner vision, which can perceive the ghostly, the spectral realm. And yet animals seem to intuitively, natively, I guess I could say, have this ability to see ghosts, to interact with ghosts in really interesting ways. So I can't help but wonder if there's this kind of like model that he's proposing in which, like, at one point we could also do that, but then through like human evolution of culture, language, God knows what else, whatever makes us human, religion, I don't know, that has blocked our ability to perceive this kind of spectral realm. None of this is clear at all. I'm just kind of like, I feel like we might be able to put some pieces together here.
Well, it feels opposite. So I keep saying, it's the same as the Willows. No, it's the opposite of the Willows. It's the same. This feels opposite again, where if you think too much, you're inviting this other realm because it senses your thinking, almost like blood or something like that, like a shark sensing blood, and it comes closer to you. However, it seems if you are thinking too much or trying to make things happen, in this case, it will just go further away. Whereas the dog and the cat just experience it. And Dr. John Silence says he has like dozens of dogs and cats at home, and he's thinking about which dog and cat will I take this time, because he knows. Well, he just loves them too, but he knows that they can help him in investigating these places. Yeah, because they are, for some reason, he doesn't explain it, but like you said, maybe they don't have all of the baggage that we have of culture, and so they are closer to it. But I think maybe he had a suspicion too, because why on earth there's so many demon cats in this house? Smoke, when the cat, when Smoke first senses the ghost, Flame doesn't really sense anything at all. The dog is like, okay, why is Smoke, the cat, being so weird? And the cat invites these things. We find out eventually because they're cats, but Smoke is like super into the idea of inviting these ghosts, and it's really happy running around and around trying to get Silence and the dog to take Flame to take a look and see what's going on. But Flame knows right away, oh no, something is bad here. I thought that was very interesting too, how not only are the dog and the cat more able to see it, but they might also be implicated or kind of associated in a way, depending on what spirit is going to be coming through.
Yeah, there's definite like personification on like a spiritual level. Cats are a little bit implicated here, a little bit suspect, you know? And, you know, what does that say about cat people? I'll leave that hanging.
I do love cats, but, you know, they do say if you die, the dog will bark and bark to try and get help for you. But they say if you die, the cat will eat you after a few days. But, you know,
yeah.
That's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Well, no. Well, that's very relevant in my thoughts as I think, should I get a cat? And I think, no.
I love cats. They can eat me. That's okay.
Oh, that's sweet. Let's talk about how John Silence is characterized, because I think in any detective novel, the most fun part, as you mentioned before, is how does the author characterize their detective? How are they special? How are they interesting? How are they different than the most famous detectives? And there's a couple things here, but one of the things that first stood out to me was the idea that John Silence may be occult, but he is not evil. Mm-hmm. And there's that one little thing where, you know, he's talking with the wife and she's like, oh, you know, he hasn't seen a doctor. He tried some clergymen and religious people, but they know so little and have so little intelligent sympathy. Most of them are so busy balancing on their own little pedestals. And then John Silence stopped her tirade with a gesture. He basically says, you will not speak ill of the church in front of me. I don't know why. I thought that was very charming. That was a very charming moment of characterization.
He's a very charming person. He's actually compared to animals so he loves animals, and he's compared to animals a few times, even to the point of his car. It sounds like a panther. But the description of him is almost priest-like, or at least a very calm guru-like person. It says, on the fine forehead was that indefinable touch of peace that comes from identifying the mind with what is permanent in the soul, and letting the impermanent slip by without power to wound or distress. So he's someone who's very good at, maybe through meditation, able to take the thoughts that are plaguing you, the thoughts that are bothering you, and letting them pass. You know, maybe acknowledging them and then letting them pass. And he's very good at just focusing on the thoughts that he wants. And I think it's interesting to say, okay, his soul is aligned with his mind.
Another thing I really liked was how, you know, even though the drugs are like the villain of the story, the catalyst for everything that goes wrong in this story, it's not that John Silence is the anti-drug crusader. You know what I mean? Quite on the contrary, he seems to be quite familiar with all of the drugs. As he says, I quite understand. I know something myself of the hashish laughter. You know, this idea that like he's familiar with drugs, but he's not overwhelmed by them. You know, he's a man who can hold his liquor, but his smoke, I don't know what you would call that, but it creates a lot of depth as someone who seems to be dabbling in both the good and the evil, the occult and the less occult. I don't know. Intriguing.
I mean, and his animals are named after a Deep Purple song. You know, it tells him that he's into the indica himself. Yeah, I think he's interesting. He mentions how much he has studied, how much he's been interested in different things. You know, he even says, yeah, we've used that as medicine before. He's not, what do you call that? Discounting it. He's not being negative about really anything. And he's even understanding kind of what's happening with the ghost. Well, he says it's lower magic, but then he also is happy to go and like, we don't really find out what happens to this spirit, but taking that evil, it seems like someone's kind of, these thoughts are suffering just by living out there. And he goes to help purify these thoughts. I think that's quite interesting of how much he is into different things that could be dangerous for him. But he says, look, I'm going to go see these dangerous things. I'm going to go up against evil, process evil, and become better for it, having exposed myself to it. Not to say all the things that he's studying aren't evil. He just says, I study all of these things. It helps inform me. And then I'm even willing to go to the far end of like these things that I don't trust. And I'm going to go and process these things as well.
I think that we're in a good place. You know, most of the time when we read short stories like this, it's like a one and done. We're exposed to the character and then we go. And maybe we don't read from that same character, same author again for 6 months to a year. But we are in a great position because we are reading every John Silence story ever written by Algernon Blackwood. So we get a cool opportunity to see how this character actually develops, to see how Blackwood continues to characterize him, and how our initial impressions may not hold up. We'll see. We'll find out. Who knows? I'll talk to you later, Bob.
I'll see you in the house full of cats.
Meow.